The following recording was made at a testimonial dinner for Allan and Helen Cruickshank, sponsored by the Indian River Audubon Society in Cocoa Beach on 19 May 1973.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to go ahead and start the program for this evening, even though I know some of you might not have finished your dessert, but please feel free to go ahead and continue while we get started with what we have to do. Speak up. Can you hear that? Okay. First of all, I'd like to introduce at the head table, as part of our meeting tonight, our distinguished guest. I'd like to have Mr. Steve Fickett and his wife Jean stand up to be recognized. Steve is a biologist for the Freshwater Fish and Game Commission over in Brooksville, Florida. And we're also very pleased tonight to have Dr. Roger Tory Peterson, internationally known for the field guide and a very personal friend of Helen Allan Cruickshank, was able to make it tonight. Would you please stand up, sir, and be recognized? We're also pleased to have in the audience, I believe, Mrs. Erna Nixon of the Erna Nixon Hammock down in Melbourne. Mrs. Nixon, would you please stand up? Good to have you. Also in the audience tonight, we have Mrs. Joseph H. Kellett present. Kitty, would you please stand up? We'd like to recognize you. She was back there. There's Kitty. There she is. And of course, the honored guests this evening, I'd like you to just recognize, if you can, Helen and Allan Cruickshank, please. Beautiful to have you with us tonight. Now, this portion of the quote business meeting with our annual dinner is the installation of officers. First of all, as outgoing president, I would like to thank each and every one of you as members of the Indian River Audubon Society, my fellow officers and board of director members, for all of the support and cooperation you've given me during my past term. I thank you very much. I would like to thank two additional outgoing officers for their efforts also. Would you please stand up and be recognized? Mrs. Mary O'Donnell, Secretary. Thank you, Mary. Mrs. Nancy Keenan, Treasurer. There's Nancy, come on. She can hardly get up there. In addition, I would like to thank Mrs. Barbara Steele for the excellent job she's done during this past year as editor of our Limpkin. Let's give her a big hand. Stand up. Come on. Alan's up to no good again. And now I'd like to introduce to you and install the new officers for the Indian River Audubon Society for the coming year. First of all, would Douglas Lowen, our first vice president, please stand up? Yeah. There he is. Hi, Doug. And Ned Steele can't get away. He's still our second vice president. Ned Steele? We have a new secretary this year, Ms. Carolyn Platt. Would you please stand up? There she is. And our treasurer for this year is Bob Fitzsimmons, but unfortunately I think he's in California. He's tied up in the missile business, so we'll have to forego, but he is our new treasurer. Now at this time, it is my pleasure, and almost a relief, to turn over the office of presidency of the Indian River Audubon Society to a very fine young man, Mr. Hugh Nicolay, and our organization will be in good hands. Hugh? Thanks very much, Al. While we're introducing people, I want to introduce some of the people who are going to be helping us next year that have not been mentioned to this point. Unfortunately, I wrote my notes on this card with a red pen. Anybody have a candle? You've already introduced Doug Lowen, first vice president next year, and Doug is going to continue in his role as we have been calling it membership chairman, but I think I'll change it to the bigger is better and no limit to growth committee. Ned Steele, who's been introduced as our continuing second vice president, and be helping out in the nature education area, particularly on the outdoor educational aspects of our program next year. Bob Fitzsimmons is treasurer, Carolyn Platt secretary, Karl Eichhorn, who will be continuing as a conservation expert, will be continuing his efforts to fry a few people who need saved. That was a play on words in case anybody didn't catch it. Let's see.
What's up, Tom Adams?
Tom Adams. He's tied up right now with administrative problems. Permanently, we hope. Also on the board of directors next year, this organization has a board of directors which essentially takes care of the policy part of the business. I'd like to make note and introduce Betty Eichhorn, who is going to be a board member again next year, and we appreciate her help. A character here named Lon Ellis, resident naturalist and radio personality. New member to the board next year will be Mr. Dave Dunsmore. In the back, there he is. And a young lady who has a big job to do, who's going to be editor of Lincoln next year, Jean Lynn. One gentleman who's not here, Wayne Machette, is going to be on the board next year, a young fellow who's very interested in birding, and it's the kind of people we want to become more active in the organization. A young lady named Helen Cruickshank, I believe, is going to continue. and one more gentleman by the name of Hal Wyle is going to not drop out, but continue with his youth education work next year and continue as a board member. Al, I've been worried about you. I realize now you don't have anything to do. And the big long summer is coming up, and a few of us, we try to think of some things for you to work on. Talk to your youth group, and after you've thoroughly studied these books this summer, they're going to give you a test. And a whole lot. All of it. That's a set of field guides, except the top one. I guess we should put it on the bottom. For reasons that are apparent. The bottom three are Peterson field guides, and the top one isn't. There you go. There are some inscriptions written in the books that are personal from me, and
and I think they come from all of society. I mean, thanks for the efforts for the last 2 years, the work you've done, and I guess I'm going to find out how much you've been doing very soon, right? Thank you. Okay, my next duty is to get rid of this mic. I'm going to introduce a gentleman who is... That's like Tom Adams again. A gentleman who has been past president of this organization for a number of years, member of the board, member of the Florida board, number of other conservation groups throughout the state, and known locally as a thriving young businessman, outstanding member of the chamber. I don't know if you're a member of the chamber or not, are you? They didn't let you in. Mr. Karl Eichhorn. Thanks a lot, Hugh. You sure this thing is working all right now? Don't touch any metal. Don't touch any metal, all right. Everybody hear me all right? I think I'll depart from my planned introduction for a moment. I thought maybe you might be interested in knowing the story behind how we're honored this evening to have Roger Tory Peterson with us. About a couple months ago, I guess, when we started planning this program, we were trying to think of some things to give Alan and Helen, and Betty was reading an article in, I think it was National Wildlife magazine, on Roger Tory Peterson, and it mentioned in there that his field guide to the birds of Mexico was about to be published. So we said, well, gee, there's a good idea. Maybe we'll get a copy of the new field guide to the birds of Mexico, and maybe we could even get Roger Tory Peterson to autograph it for the Cruickshank. So I dashed off a letter. I didn't have his address. All I knew was Old Lyme, Connecticut, and I guess it's not a very big city because, or else it, anyway, I thought, well, I'd probably get an answer pretty quickly since they're good friends and have been for many, many years. But I didn't get an answer for quite a while. I was beginning to wonder. And then one day, we got a letter from some obscure place in England. And I said to Betty, I said, gee, who do we know in England? No, anybody in England. Well, I opened it. It turned out to be a letter from Mrs. Peterson. And she said that she was very sorry, but the field guide wouldn't be available in time for the dinner because Roger had just finished going over the galley proofs, and it wouldn't be published until sometime in the middle of summer, July or something like that, and we'd have to take a rain check on it. Incidentally, I think we have that rain check, Alan and Helen, so we'll probably still get that book, hopefully. But then she went on to say that Roger would like very much to come to the dinner. I mentioned in the letter that we were having this testimonial dinner, and she said that they were in England then, and he was going to make every effort to come. Well, naturally, we were delighted. I mentioned this to some of the board members, but we didn't tell the membership at large because we realized that there was a good possibility something would come up that he might not make the trip. So I wrote back right away and told them how pleased we were and hoped they could certainly come, and offered any help that we could. Well, I hadn't heard anything more, and people were asking me, those who knew about this were asking me this evening. I said, well, gee, I haven't heard anything. Apparently he couldn't make it. Well, you see, at the last minute he came in, and we're really delighted, of course, and I wondered if you might have anything you'd like to say to the Cruickshank, to the group.
You don't care how long I talk? I'm very embarrassed about being late, but I made the misjudgment of thinking I could drive from Miami in 2 hours. I thought it was 2 hours. So that's partly why I'm late. Then I had a lot of interruptions. At one point, a state trooper stopped me, and he said I've been, when I went past the last toll gate, I was apparently weaving on the pavement, and he said, are you drunk? I said no. He said, have you been drinking? I said, well, I've been drinking this orange freeze that I brought down the road, and I showed him that. What happened was I was trying to adjust my safety belt, and you know you have to have two hands to do that. So I just at that one point let the car. See, my car at home is a very stable car. You can get it and it'll go straight. Well, that little thing that I heard from Hurt is very unstable. So apparently the gal that back at the toll booth reported me, and so then he said, "Are you sleeping?" I said, "No, I'm not sleeping." And so and he apparently took my excuse. I said I was trying to adjust something. So he said, well, be careful. But it takes about 4 hours to do that drive. Yeah, I suppose that's a good time. I should have, see, the trouble was I had plenty of time, and I was enjoying myself so much at this aquarium. And, you know, I'm quite a zoo fan. I do enjoy good zoos. And incidentally, Alan, you know, the Bronx has the best birdhouse in the world now. That thing is fantastic, that new world of birds. Where the birds are all happy, you're not looking at them through this wire mesh that we always used to have them behind. Now these birds are happy and they're leading rather normal lives, and you can see certain birds well that you simply could not see in a wild state, particularly these very sensitive tropical things. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and see, I've known Alan for, you know how long? Next year will be 50 years. And Alan gets better looking all the time. He was awfully nice looking as a youngster, but he's getting better looking as a senior citizen. And I think at the age of 65 you qualify as a senior citizen, don't you?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, I don't know when that starts, but the first time I saw Alan was back in 1925 at the American Museum, and I remember these two high school boys, Joe Hickey and Allan Cruickshank, being shown by Forbush the original Fiortes plates for the Forbush Birds of Massachusetts. And Howard Cleves was heckling at the sidelines. Now, all of this was in Chapman's office. Now, if there had only been something like Kodachrome in those days, or color film, to document a thing of that sort. I remember these two youngsters, both in knee pants. Of course, they don't wear knee pants anymore. Looking at the original Fiortes. I believe the second time I ran across Alan was in Van Cortlandt Swamp. He reminds me that he showed me a black duck's nest and a Sora rail's nest. That was in 27. That's a long time ago. He belonged to a very, very select group called the Bronx County Bird Club, about the tightest, most select bird group that ever existed. A group of teenagers that lived in different parts of the Bronx. I think you were the only one from Woodicrest, weren't you?
Yep.
There was the Hunts Point Dump Group, and then there were the there was a great sort of. I was not from the Bronx. I was the first non-Bronx member, and the reason I got in is because they couldn't get rid of me. So I was allowed in the club, and over the years, a good many of them became rather distinguished ornithologists. In fact, the second two non-Bronx members, one was William Vogt, who headed the Planned Parenthood movement, rode the road to survival, and another was the next was John Kieran, who became rather well known as a sports commentator, and it was I think a rather unusual club. Now, and I think that in modern bird watching as we know it, the techniques had their roots in the old Bronx County Bird Club. Those lads more or less pointed the way to the Linnean Society, and they in turn settled in different parts of the country and introduced these techniques to all parts of the land. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that, Alan. I think our techniques, the old Bronx County Bird Club techniques, which are so we take so much for granted today, were really initiated by this group of very young men who, being very competitive, all of them, made quite a game of it. Now, Alan was born under the same sign of the zodiac that I was, Virgo, which is, but he goes one better. He was actually born in the Virgin Islands, but I don't know. I wonder how many the hardcore bird watchers here were born under the sign of Virgo. Quite a few, I presume. But you know, I find so often that some of these really sharp fellows like Joe Cadbury and any number of others were born under that sign. I'm not an astrologist, but at any rate, when we were at the Audubon camp years ago, nearly everyone on the staff had their birthday within a 3-day period, and so we'd have a collective birthday party, and I would always go back for that party. Joe Cadbury, Bart Cadbury, and Don Bohr, Allan Cruickshank, and this is the way to have birthday parties. It saves a lot of time and money and effort. Now, actually, I knew Helen long before she was Mrs. Cruickshank, and I remember how Alan found Helen up an apple tree photographing a green heron's nest. And this appealed to him very much, and so they went on lots of field trips together, and I went on those field trips. And finally, after 2 or 3 years of that, I said to Alan, "What are your intentions?" I said, "You can't waste a young lady's time like this unless you've got intentions." And I said, "Alan, if you have no intentions, I'm going to move in." So at any rate, they've been happy ever after. So I like to think that I played the role of Cupid. But to get back to the Audubon camp, which was where we had such a close association, I actually am almost prehistoric. I was sent there by John Baker to look over the place to see whether it was suitable for a nature camp. That was in, 35, yes. And the next year I was the bird instructor, and Alan was my assistant. But obviously Alan impressed John Baker more than I did, because I didn't come back, and Alan was there for years afterwards. And the thing about being at the camp in those days as young unmarried men, it was almost like being a grouse on a drumming log. It was just. And Alan and I went. He's become a great lecturer, and I do some lecturing. But we went to. I went to Alan's first bird lecture, and he went to mine. And I remember I started it off with my old 4x5 lantern slide that I made with my Primo number 9 camera. And so I think given only one lecture before to some garden group in Massachusetts, about 8 or 10 women in the room. And so when my friend Bill Vogt, who was then editor of Bird Lore, asked me whether I'd like to give a proper lecture, I said, "Fine." I said, "Where is it?" He said, "The Brooklyn Academy." He said, "You get paid for it." I'd be paid $25. And that was a lot of money in those days. So I said, "Fine." So I thought, well, this would probably be rather like the garden clubs I'd been speaking to. And about a month before, I went down to look at the place. And here was this enormous hall holding about 1,500 people. So I thought, well, I'd better prepare this one. So I wrote it out word for word and had it right down. And I decided that Alan would be a big help, in as much as he was in the area. And so I started out with a story about what? Oh, about screech owls, yes, about the ghosts of my hometown, where and I imitated the screech owl that would be heard from the cemetery, and how it had started the rumors of ghosts that stopped the trolley car and all that. And so I imitated the screech owl, and then I thought the real dramatic effect would be to have the answering owl in the distance. So Alan called back from the balcony, and well, this is fine. That one worked great. Actually, this was a children's audience. It was a young people's audience, and they had to sit through me to see a Douglas Fairbanks film. That was the only reason that I got by with it at all. But the kids thought it was so wonderful that. So the next time I tried an imitation, tried a chickadee or something, well, half the kids in the audience whistled back. So I had to forget the imitations. It was difficult. But then at one point, I was, of course, had my back to the screen, talking for my prepared script, and I heard the kids giggling and then laughing, and I looked at the screen, and here my chestnut-sided warbler was dripping right off the screen, apparently in this old-fashioned hot projector. I've been talking too long, and all the emulsion melted, and the thing just stripped off the screen. So from that point on, I had to improvise a little and to shorten my comments. And finally, I got to my last line, my punch line, and Lord, I couldn't remember it. So I had this very awkward silence for almost a full 60 seconds. And then it came to me, and of course they all thought it was pausing for effect, and I got a big hand. But then Alan gave his first lecture. He thought, in as much as I could do it, he certainly had no problems. And so I attended your first one on Staten Island. Remember that? And well, I'm talking too long again, but actually, in retirement now, Alan, don't get worried about it. I retired about 30 years ago, and I assure you that the next 65 years are the best. Enjoy with it. And you, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're delighted to have you here this evening. Well, let's get on with some other parts of the program here. I must warn you that this program is almost completely unplanned, it's unpredictable, and it's unrehearsed, and so it's hard to tell really what's going to happen. If any of you have any nervous babysitters at home, maybe you ought to call up and just tell them to hang on, that, you know, we'll get through here sometime. When we first planned this program, we decided that we weren't really going to have a very formal program. We weren't going to have any real formal after-dinner speeches or anything like this. We decided this would be a sort of a fun evening, an entertaining evening. We were going to just pull no punches. We're going to sort of take the advice of the younger generation who were always telling us to, you know, tell it like it is. So we decided that would sort of be our motto this evening as far as Alan and Helen are concerned. And we got to thinking that most of us here have really only known them for a relatively short time. Some of you may have known them ever since they moved to Brevard County. Some of us have only known them, maybe 8 or 10 years, and others just a few months or years. So we got to thinking that we really ought to invite somebody who had known them many years ago. And in thinking this over, I remembered that Steve Fickett was once a student of Alan's at the main camp. So I discussed this once with Steve at one of the Florida Audubon meetings, and then asked him if he'd be willing to come. He said sure, and Hal called him up one night to confirm it. So we asked Steve to come here tonight to give us a little behind-the-scenes information about the Cruickshanks. And well, when I talked to Steve, he said, well, you know, when I was a student of Alan's, I was the butt of all his jokes. I said, well, wonderful, this is a good opportunity to get even. Well, anyway, most of you, I think, know Steve. He is a biologist with the Game and Freshwater Fish Commission. He's a director of the Florida Audubon Society. He's very active in the society. He's been on many of our Christmas bird counts for Alan. And he's an active member of the Fernando Audubon Society. He hails from a small village over in the western wilderness of Florida called Brooksville. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it's that away, several hours, I think. And Steve drove all the way over here this evening. We're delighted to have him here. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Steve Fickett, who is going to tell it like it was. I don't know what we're doing here. I'll try very hard not to. Thank you, Carl. I'd just like to say that this is something that I have waited 35 years for, and I'm going to enjoy every moment of it. I can't go back quite as long as Mr. Peterson did, but I can say that back in 1938, I had the privilege of attending the Audubon camp in Maine, and it was really quite an experience for me. Back at that time, I was a teenager, and I was even more naive then than I am now, and it, as has already been mentioned, I was the butt of most of Allan Cruickshank's jokes. I think he recognized my greenness immediately and decided I would be an excellent victim. Believe me, I was. I'd like to sort of reminisce just for a few moments tonight with you, tell you some of the things that happened to me. I hope I won't be too risque. Some of the people said, really fry him tonight, put it to him. And I said, well, I really can't do that. I might be thrown out. But I can tell you a few things that kind of stand out in my mind. Back in those days, the camp staff acted as the officer of the day, the OD. And, of course, from time to time, it became Alan's job to be officer of the day. And for some reason or other, he decided he wanted to catch me out on the island after hours. If my memory serves me correctly, I believe we were supposed to be in our cots around 10 o'clock. Because I was single in those days. We had the place for the single men, the single ladies, the married folks, and so forth. And he would go to great ends to find me out on an island. Occasionally, we just didn't have enough hours of the day to learn all we wanted to learn. So once in a while, one of the other camp students would want to go out on the island after hours and listen to saw-whet owls or seals in the bay, things like this. We were really trying to improve our knowledge of what we found on Hog Island in Maine. Well, it just so happened that Alan and I were the only two people on the island that had 5-cell flashlights. I had one, he had the other, and whenever I saw a very bright light, I knew it had to be Allan Cruickshank looking for me. So on this one particular night that I will never forget, because it was somewhat embarrassing, I was out with a young lady who had never heard a saw-whet owl on this particular island. And all of a sudden, actually, before I noticed his light, we were talking about barred owl, and I had imitated a barred owl, and I made the mistake of mentioning that the southern barred owl had a little brrr sort of on the end, you know, quite a little bit different. And I saw this light about that time coming down the trail. I said, "Don't make any noise. That's Mr. Cruickshank. He's looking for me. I know it." Well, the light came along, and then the light went out, and I saw the light, what appeared to be the light going down the trail. I think he just faked me out that night. And when I thought everything was safe, the young lady said to me, "Now, how did that southern barred owl go?" And I said, I imitated the barred owl and made that little trill, and immediately the light came on, practically in my face, and he caught me. There on his red hand. Well, the next morning, you can imagine, he raised his hand, which was a signal to everyone in the dining room that Mr. Cruickshank had an announcement to make. And he made the announcement that finally he had caught Steve Fickett out on the island after hours with a young lady. And he went into great detail to explain that I indicated that I was listening to saw-whet owls. And this was very embarrassing to me at the time. But that wasn't the worst of it. I could tell you something that was much worse. But I can recall that when I first arrived in camp, I was told that if you really want to be in the right place, try to be at the Cruickshank's table. Alan sat at one end, Helen sat at the other. So I ended up at the Cruickshank's table, and I was delighted. This one particular day, I was sitting right next to Helen. And I didn't realize it. We were talking, but as I say, the signal was to put your hand up, or Alan would put his hand up like this, and that meant that everybody in the dining room would get very quiet. They listened. They knew he had an announcement. And all of a sudden, Helen and I were conscious of the fact that everything was quiet and everyone was looking at us. And finally, Alan said, "Fickett, stop playing with Helen's leg." I want to tell you, I was about 16 years old, and I turned all sorts of colors. This really got to me. And of course, knowing Helen, you can imagine how Helen felt. It just happened that at this particular session, there was a very attractive young lady from McGill University, Gibby Gibson. I can still remember that name. She was very attractive, and of course the weather was quite cool in Hog Island, and you wore sweaters in those days. And I can recall one day that my attention was attracted to this Gibby Gibson. She looked particularly nice that day. And here again, I was staring. Shouldn't have been, but I was. I was very young, you know. And all of a sudden, I became very conscious again that everything was very quiet in the dining room. And Alan was ready to make another announcement. And he said, "Steve Fickett," he said, "you like that sweater, don't you?" I'm not going to tell you what else he said. They just might throw me out of here. But I can tell you it was embarrassing to me. But you know, I had a couple of opportunities to get even. And this is what I'm really enjoying this, because I really had a chance to get even. And this isn't easy. I'm not even sure about tonight. You know, when I bring an Audubon group over here to Cocoa Port Canaveral, Alan is usually kind enough to meet the group and escort us around the Cape. But unfortunately, sometime during the trip, he has to tell these little stories about their leader. And he always asks, "Do you really know the kind of fellow that's leading you over here now?" And then he proceeds to tell them. And it's really something. But I can recall that back in those days, Alan played an accordion. This was the way he awakened us in the morning. You could hear him coming down that trail playing "Oh My Darling Clementine." And believe me, you'd have to be practically dead not to hear it. But it happened in those days. I was a pretty sound sleeper. You know, with all that owl chasing and all that sort of thing, you sleep pretty soundly with that night air and all of that, the balsam fir and so forth. So what would happen was that if Alan would come in and find me in that bunk, he would jump right in the bed on top of me or dump my bed over or something. Well, one morning, I don't know how it happened, but I heard him coming. I jumped out of the bed, grabbed some of the blankets,
stuffed him in the bed, and pulled the blanket up over the pillow, the way I usually slept in that cool air. And I just told everybody present to just be real quiet. Now, Alan came in. It happens that there was a little stairway that went up in that building, and there was sort of a balcony that came right over the top of my bed. And I ran up the stairway, and I sat up on the balcony. And I looked down, and Alan walked in with the accordion. He saw what appeared to be me in the bunk, and he made a motion, don't say anything. He put his accordion down, jumped straight up in the air, and came right down on the bunk and almost went through to the floor. I tell you, I sat up there and I said, Alan, are you, or Mr. Cruickshank, I said, Mr. Cruickshank, are you looking for me? That was one time I got him good. Another time I recall that we had a visit from some of our Audubon people from the West Coast. I remember Mr. Bert Harwell was one of them that came over. They were some of the staff people from over on the west side of the country, and back in those days we all had a project to complete. I believe, Helen, they used to call that the Queen Mary, isn't that correct? Down where we used to work on our projects. And we all had to complete a project before camp was over, unless you'd been there before. And I recall very well that they had mentioned the fact that if we were lucky, after supper, Mr. Harwell and some of the people would probably visit the Queen Mary, and if you were fortunate, they might look over your shoulder and comment about the work that you were doing. Well, I never was one that would run around looking, for the brass and so forth. I enjoy meeting them, but I just never wanted to stand in line to meet them, so to speak. So I decided I was just going out on the island and listen to the thrushes singing. It's a beautiful place. Those of you that have been to the Audubon camp in Maine, I'm sure will agree. It was a beautiful evening, and I just decided I'd go out on the island for a walk. And the fellows working there with me, they were saying, well, you're going to miss it, Steve. I think we'll go down there to the Queen Mary, and possibly we'll meet Mr. Harwell and his group. Well, I'm going out on the island. And I went out on the island. Well, it happened that while I was on the island, I heard Alan's voice. And I honestly did not realize that he had this distinguished group with him. I'm sure I would not have done this. But I recognized his voice, and I heard him say, now that's the call note of the veery. Back in those days, I could imitate the veery pretty well. And I backed into one of the spruces and hid, and he was saying, now it's right over here. And he would start imitating it, and when he called, I called. And he said, there it is, now let's work our way right over here. And finally, he worked his way right up to me, and I stepped down, and I said, you looking for me, Alan? Well, I can tell you that he was somewhat surprised, but I was even more surprised, to be honest with you, because here's Mr. Harwell and this distinguished group of people, Mr. Karl Buckheister and Mrs. Buckheister, Helen, the whole group, and Karl Buckheister said, what are you doing out here, Steve? And I said, well, I'm just out listening to the thrushes. I didn't know what to say, but I told the truth. And so they said, well, why don't you join us? And I said, well, I would like to very much. So I ended up going over the island with them. I got back that night, and one of the boys said, Steve, you really missed it. Mr. Harwell and his group came into the Queen Mary. One of them looked right over my shoulder, commented about my project. By the way, did you see anything out on the island? I said, yes, I did. As a matter of fact, I took a tour of the island with Mr. Harwell and the whole group. I just couldn't believe it. They were very envious. One other little incident that happened that I want to recall, I could stand up here all evening and tell you interesting little things that happened. One little incident that I recall was one time we were out on one of the oceanic islands where the birds were nesting, and the Arctic terns were nesting at that particular time, and Alan had gone to great lengths to tell us not to disturb the eggs. For heaven's sakes, leave them as they are. Be very careful where you step. And I happened to look down and see one egg that had been drilled apparently by a crow. It just had a small round hole in the side. I still have that egg, incidentally, in Brooksville. But I picked it up, and I put the hole down against the palm of my hand, and I walked over to Mr. Cruickshank, and I said, look, Mr. Cruickshank, what I have found. And he looked at that egg and turned all sorts of colors. He was all ready to give me a lecture. Don't shoot. I told you you'd get even with me somehow or other. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's doing it.
Sounds like an exaggeration.
Wow. But at any rate, as he noticed, the hole in the egg, and I'd saved me a lot of trouble. I don't know what's going on over here. I'm almost afraid to say anything.
Don't let the wire touch.
Drop the whole wire?
Yeah.
All right. I'll try that. Okay. Now, As I say, I could stand up here for some time and relate things that happened. It was really a very fine experience being at the Audubon camp in Maine. And I do want to be just a little bit serious for a moment. I've often been asked just when I became interested in birds and nature. It'd be a little bit hard for me to answer that question, actually, because my father loved birds. He loved nature, wildlife. And from the time I was old enough to be dragged along through the woods with him, I can recall in Maine that he was taking me on the trails and pointing out birds and telling me to go back to the house and look at his bird books and try to identify the bird that I had seen. I would look and point it out to him. He said, "That's right, son, that's the right bird." Or then he'd say sometimes, "I think maybe you'd better look a little longer." But I can say this, that being at Audubon Nature Camp and meeting Alan and Helen was something that was certainly a highlight in my life. They're people that I've always had a very strong affection for. I can recall in the summertime when Alan and Helen used to live up at Highland Hall apartment in New York. They used to, or rather in Rye, they used to invite me for dinner, and it was always something that I looked forward to. And I would like to, I think that, or I'd like to say that I appreciate very much the opportunity of being with all of you tonight. I appreciate very much the fact that Hal and the rest of you, Karl, have invited me, made it possible for me to participate in this testimonial dinner to Alan and Helen, two of my dearest friends. And I want to thank them for helping to make my life more meaningful, and I want to wish them all of the most happiness for many, many years to come. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Steve. Probably a lot of you don't realize it, but in every organization there are sometimes smaller internal organizations or little secret societies and so forth. And we have one of these in the Indian River Audubon Society that you've probably never heard of. It's called the Indian River Theatrical Marching and Chowder Society. Now this is a small group. It's a very select group. In fact, it was only selected a few days ago. But we decided that one of the things we do here this evening is give you a little one-act play which we've entitled A Day in the Life of Allan Dudley Cruickshank at Canaveral Harbor. Now, the conditions are kind of crowded here. I'm not sure how all the thespians are going to get up here and get in their costumes and grease paint and so forth. So I hope you'll bear with us for a few minutes. In the interim, Ted Earl, one of our members, has graciously agreed to give you a harmonica solo rendition of the National Audubon theme song, She Was Only a Bird in a Gilded Cage. Ted, did you bring your harmonica? A few moments, please. All right now, Hugh, I saw 67 cars in that auto caravan. Where did all these people come from, anyway? This looks like Cox's Army. It's a roaring mob. How can we possibly do any birding with all these people here? Are you sure there aren't some Pelican Island Audubon people in this group?
Maggie, are you here? I don't see anywhere.
Look at that strange-looking one over there. He looks like he must be from Hernando Audubon Society. All right, now, all you people, with this great big crowd, somebody has to be the first sergeant. Now then, we're at Canaveral Harbor. Now, some of you are beginners. How many of you are beginners here?
I got to use Peterson Field Guide.
That qualifies. I can always tell a beginner. All right, now, don't get confused here today. Remember that sometimes we see as many as 50 or 60 species of birds here in Canaveral Harbor. So all beginners start the same. Learn a few birds at a time. The easiest way to start off is to learn the 5 common seagulls here at Canaveral Harbor. Now, if you learn the 5 common seagulls today, And if you come back next weekend by yourselves with your field guide and your binocular and learn 5 more species, and if you come back the following week and learn 5 more, and you keep doing this for 10 weeks, you'll know 50 species of birds. And then you'll be as smart as Lon Ellis. And when you know that many birds, you can do like Lon and start fooling people into thinking you know even more. All right, now, we're at Canaveral Harbor, and we're going to look at all these birds on that sandbar out there. You'll notice there's only one sandbar left in the harbor. A year ago, this harbor used to be full of sandbars and mud banks, and it used to be the finest birding place in the whole state of Florida. Now, look what's happened. The Corps of Engineers came in here and improved it. Look at that. They've dredged, they've filled, they've put up dikes, they've put up revetments and seawalls. They've ruined it. How could George King have allowed this to happen?
Alan, we're turning purple.
Oh, well, all right now. Let's look out on the sandbar. Now look at the very left part of the sandbar out there. What do you see?
Alan, I can't see anything. Where's it at?
What?
Where? I don't
Well, you have the lens shade on the lens cap on your telescope.
Sorry.
I knew you were a beginner.
Sorry.
I must tell you this story now. You know, everybody thinks that Roger Tory Peterson is a fantastic wildlife photographer. Well, let me tell you, I taught him everything he knows. Back when we were kids in knickers, I used to say, Roger, take the lens cap off your camera for heaven's sake. Now then, look to the left of that sandbar out there. You'll see a bird that's called the giant seagull. Now, the technical name is the great black-backed seagull, the great black-backed gull, the largest gull in North America. Now, remember that. All right, now let's look a little bit farther to the right. Now you see a large seagull. It's all brown. That's a herring gull, a herring gull. Look up there. What's that? What just flew over? A brown pelican.
A what?
A brown pelican.
We know pelicans.
Now, don't laugh. Pelicans are endangered species. Florida is the last nesting habitat for the brown pelicans. You know, people often come up to me and they say, Mr. Cruickshank, I just saw a beautiful male pelican. Well, I laugh because you can't really tell the difference. Male pelicans and female pelicans look just alike, but the pelicans know the difference. All right, now let's look back on the sandbar there. What's the bird next to the herring gull? It's a Caspian tern. Now listen to me. There are 2 large terns here in Florida, the Caspian tern and the royal tern. And you can tell the difference because the Caspian tern has a thick blood-red bill and the royal tern has an orange bill. Now, if they're flying and you can't see their bills, you listen to their call. Remember, a royal tern goes brrr, brrr, and a Caspian tern goes yak, yak. Now wait a minute. Maybe it's the Caspian tern that goes and the royal tern goes yak. I'm not sure. I don't have my Peterson guide with me today, but really, it's very easy to tell it. You just have to remember the difference. All right, now, I see the best bird we'll see all day here. Right out there is a large brownish shorebird with a long D-curved bill. Wait till my grandmother hears about this. It's incredible. It's a long-billed curlew. Does everybody see that? That's one of the finest birds you'll see here today, a long-billed curlew. All right, now, let's look over here. Oh, look at the birds on that piling over there. 2 birds that look like big black geese. Now, what are those? Double-crested cormorants. Double-crested cormorants. Now, the one on the right is a female. How do I know it's a female? Its bill is open. My goodness, this is incredible. I've never seen anything like this. Fantastic. You know, I think I've discovered a new species of field mouse out there on that sandbar. It has large black ears. This is remarkable. Wait till my grandmother hears about this, a new species right here in Canaveral Harbor. I'm going to call Charlie Callison tonight and tell him all about it. Now, listen, I'm going to name this Rattus Canaveral Cruickshanky. Now I want everybody to witness this discovery. Look right out in front of my telescope. Why is that kid in the Mickey Mouse sweater standing in front of our telescope? Now get those children out of there. They're scaring all the birds away. My good. Look, what just flew over? What just flew over? A fish crow. A fish crow. Now, Foster White and I have been birding here for 37 years, and we have never seen a common crow east of Highway 1. So all of the birds you see over here are fish crows. Now then, how can you tell the difference? They look exactly alike. Remember that a common crow goes, caw, 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 ah, 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 and a fish crow goes, ugga, ugga, ugga. All right, now, let's look over here. What is the big bird that just flew off the sandbar there? It's a great blue heron. Now, look at me even if you don't want to. How did I know it's a heron? Very easy. A heron and egrets fly with their head back on their neck like this. If it were a stork or a crane, thank you. Or a spoonbill, it would fly with its head straight out. Now remember that. It's very easy to tell the difference. All right, now, I've just checked my field list here, and I see that we've already identified 56 species of birds. 56 species. Wait till my grandmother hears about this. You know what that means? That means that we've already gotten more birds this morning than Maggie Bowman gets on her entire Christmas count at Pelican Island. Well, now, it's almost 11 o'clock, and Lon Ellis has a heavy date this afternoon, so I have to get him back to Merritt Island. And so we'll have to leave. Thank you all for coming. You're the smartest group I've ever had. Well, thank you. Everybody organized again here. Next on our program, we decided that we wanted to give Alan and Helen several gifts, and we've spent quite a bit of time planning some of the things we're going to give them. A lot of effort and thought has gone into this. I have a box full of things over here. No. You need a shave? Now, well, let's start out this way. We just had a skit about Canaveral Harbor, and as you know, that's one of Alan's favorite birding places. We always think of him in connection with Canaveral Harbor, and it is true that the harbor has changed a great deal in the last year, and very likely the shorebird population is going to go down. So we have here, if I can find it in this overloaded box, let's see. Overloaded. Gee, I wrote this in red pencil, too. Good grief. Well, anyway, I think this is the right envelope. Does that say harbor picture? Oh, very good. We have here some photographs of Canaveral Harbor as it used to be before the dredges came in and before all this work took place, and we want to give this to you, Alan, courtesy of your good friend George King. Now, another one of Alan and Helen's favorite birding spots are the various dumps around the county. Now, the reason for this, of course, is that dumps attract all kinds of birds, especially gulls and so forth, and every now and then Alan finds a very unusual bird at the site of a dump. And so we had a certificate made up here, and if just a moment, I'll try to get it out of this envelope. It's a beautiful certificate. You can't really see it, but you can look at it afterwards. I'll read what it says. Dump certificate. This is to certify that Helen and Allan Cruickshank are hereby issued a lifetime pass into all dumps of this domain for purposes of outdoor recreation and identification of rare and unusual birds. Now, this is very authentic. It's signed by Lee Winter, chairman of the county commission. Absolutely. I took it up to his office and stood there while he signed it. Well, of course, we also know that Alan is a famous wildlife photographer, and for years he has taken pictures for Florida Audubon or for the National Audubon Society. Back in the early days, of course, Alan was used to using some of the really finest photographic equipment that you can find anywhere. I know for a fact that he used a speed graphic and the old 4x5 Graflex B and so on. You know, when I was growing up, I was kind of a camera nut, and I used to collect all these catalogs, and I used to sit for hours looking at the old former Graflex catalogs of speed graphics and Graflexes and so forth. And that used to be one of my ambitions, to own something like that. I might mention as a side, I asked Alan 2 or 3 months ago what he did with that old Graflex, and of all things he said he sold it. I was horrified. He doesn't know this, but I would have taken a 20-year mortgage out on Betty to have had one of his original cameras. I'm still mad at him about it. But anyway, what the point I'm making is that he was used to the very finest photographic equipment, American-made precision equipment, Bell and Howell movie camera and so forth. Of course, now that he's retired, you know, the price of 16-millimeter film is, you just can't feed one of those cameras on a retirement budget. And he's sold his old cameras, and he's given up taking movies. Now, understand he's now using some sort of an imitation Japanese camera called a Nikon, and pretty shabby sort of equipment. And so we think this is deplorable, really, when a guy's used to such good gear and has to resort to that. So we all got together, the board of directors, and we decided we were going to do something about this. We were going to get him a good precision American camera to use again, something that, you know, has all the modern features, cartridge loading, automation, everything that a wildlife photographer needs. Now, of course, these are in very short supply, and we had this order to Brevard Photo. It just came in about a week ago. We weren't sure it was even going to get here for tonight. But also, of course, equipment like this is pretty expensive, and we talked a lot about it, whether we should spend the money. So everybody said, yes, Alan, we should do this for Alan. Hugh, there's no money left in the treasury, I'm sorry. You've got to start from scratch next year, that's all there is to it. Anyway, we managed to get together enough money to get the camera, but I'm sorry to say, Alan, that we did not have enough money to get a number of accessories, extra lenses, and so forth, but we hope that you'll be able to acquire these as you go along. So I want to give you this. Now, handle it carefully, please. This is a fine piece of. Hold it up. And we hope that you will be able to use that in good health for many years to come, Alan. Now to go with this, now these new cameras, you know, you use Graflexes and speed graphics. Those are pretty simple compared to today's cameras with built-in computers and photo cells and all that. So we thought it would be a good idea to get you a technical book to go with it. And we don't mean this as an insult. We know you've been taking pictures for many years, but really this will bring you up to date, Alan. You know, these are very new devices. So we have here a copy of a technical book that all famous wildlife photographers use. I'm sure Roger Tory Peterson has one of these in his gadget bag. How to make good pictures by Easton Kodak. as I said, we decided to make this meeting a sort of a cozy meeting between the Indian River Audubon Society and the Cruickshank. We didn't invite the press or anything to the program tonight, but when I came in, I did notice that Mr. Rick Black of the Tomorrow newspaper was sitting back there in the audience, and Rick told me that he had a presentation to make to Mr. Cruickshank. Rick?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I represent a blue ribbon panel. We selected you to be the recipient of the first Trident Trophy for being an environmental bigot.
Thank you, Rick. That is tremendous. That is beyond. Oh, would you bring that to me, Bob? I'm sure it's a congratulatory message for Alan. Would you bring it to me, please, or have someone hand it to you? You don't mind if I read this to you, Alan?
Why not?
You're
bugging me so much, I'll call you Watergate.
This is quite a surprise, getting a telegram in the middle of this banquet. Yes, it is to Alan. You're sure you don't mind my reading this, do you? I'm sure everybody would be delighted to hear what someone has to say in this obviously congratulatory message. Oh. Hey, this is interesting, Alan. This is a Navy telegram. Yeah, it's got these spooky letters up at the top. It's CINCPACSU. Oh, I think that's Commander-in-Chief of Pacific Submarine Fleet, I believe, if I remember my Navy right. It's datelined Bangor, Washington. Isn't that where they were going to put the Trident base? Bangor? Yes. Bangor, Washington, yes. It's from an Admiral Bilgewater. Yes. You don't mind my reading this, do you? Okay, it's to Mr. Allan D. Cruickshank, ecologist. See, those civil service secretaries sure can't spell ecologist. OBSTRUCTIONIST. Well, some secretaries just can't spell. Rockledge, Florida. Now the text, You know, I think they put this in code, Alan. I can't really read this. It sort of looks like... Well, we worked over Alan enough. Now it's Helen's turn. Now, you know, we really had problems trying to think of things to give to Helen because, you know, she's a little bit different from us. You know, Alan is pretty retiring.
She has everything.
Well, you know, Alan's a pretty retiring guy, but Helen is even more so, and she just doesn't really stand out in a way that Alan does somehow, and we just had a lot of trouble thinking of things to give to Helen. Well, for instance, she's interested in all sorts of things besides birds. She's, for years, has been very interested in flowers and plants. She has a wide range of interests, whereas Alan is strictly interested in birds. You know, when I worked at the Cape, we used to refer to this as sort of tunnel vision, you know, but that may not be a good term. But, well, to illustrate what I'm talking about, about 2 days after they returned from Greece, Alan came into our store to tell us all about the trip, and he started telling me about it. I said, gee, it must have been wonderful. How many birds did you get, Alan? Oh, he said the birding was terrible. We only got 160 species. Very disgruntled about it, you know. And I said, well, gee, 160 species in 3 weeks, that's pretty remarkable. I'd
be real proud to get that many birds, no new species. But Alan couldn't see it. I said, well, look at it from this point of view, Alan. You were in Greece, the cradle of modern civilization. Lots of people would just love to go to Greece. Didn't you enjoy looking at the antiquities, for instance? Alan said, oh, they're just a bunch of piles of rock. They ought to tear those things down and plant trees and bushes so they'd have more birds in Greece. Well, anyhow, getting back to Helen, sorry, Alan, I said I was through with you. But, getting back to Helen, I mentioned that she's interested not only in birds but also in plants and flowers. And this can get kind of confusing when you study botany and ornithology at the same time. And so I thought it would be appropriate if we got her some kind of a technical book on the subject. And I called a number of well-known ornithologists and botanists, and they all, without a single deviation, they all recommended one textbook. And it's the sort of thing you can't just go over to Thorne's bookstore and get. And so I had to contact the curator of the American Museum of Natural History to get a copy of this book. It's a very unique book, and I want to give this to Helen. It's called How to Tell the Birds from the Flowers and Other Woodcuts. Now, if I can find it quickly, I want to just read you. I just want to read one thing. This is serious now. You people are laughing, but this is very serious. This tells you how to tell the difference between a tern and a turnip. To tell the turnip from the tern, a thing which everyone should learn. Observe the turnip in the air, see how he turns, and now compare him with the inert vegetable, who thus to turn is quite unable, for he is rooted to the spot, while as we see the tern is not. So, Helen? Now, Helen, of course, has been an ardent conservationist all her life. She was conservation chairman of the Indian River Audubon Society for 10 years. Now, somehow I think we should have given her a medal for that. But she has done a tremendous amount of work in conservation. And you know that developers and boosters and boomers and so forth are fond of calling us collectively a bunch of little old ladies in tennis shoes. And I suppose that's what some people think of Helen. In fact, the guy who was pushing the jetport called us a bunch of butterfly chasers, you may recall. But as Hal Scott said, at a meeting some time back, he said, well, one thing has really changed, though. The little old ladies are now wearing spikes on their tennis shoes, and believe you me, that is true. And so we thought that Helen has earned a new pair of sneakers, and we thought that we would present her with a pair here. Let's see if I can find them here. There are a lot of things in this book here, or this box. Now you notice these tennis shoes do have spikes on them. They're pretty good tennis shoes. Now they have been used, Helen. Well, as a matter of fact, these belong to a well-known local conservationist. He was last seen examining a sewer outfall in Cocoa. Nobody's seen him since. They found these sneakers on the bank, and we thought you would like them. They are a little large, but we know that you're a big enough person to fill them, Helen. Lots of try it, Helen. Lots of try it. Now, I have to go down in the box here again. Helen has, of course, she's kind of deceptive because she looks like a shy, retiring person, but I'll tell you, she can be a real tigress at times. If any of you have ever read some of the letters Helen has written to erring politicians,
I'll tell you, boy, you have to hold them out like this. She sends them by private messenger. The post office department won't, they won't handle them. But many years ago, before my time in the Indian River Audubon Society, I'm told that there was a proposal here to put a big oil refinery in on Merritt Island or the harbor or something like that. Port Canaveral, yes, there was going to be a big oil refinery. Well, Helen, for some reason, didn't like this idea, and she fought tooth and nail with every politician in the county and almost single-handedly defeated this thing. And that's a tremendous accomplishment, I think. So we have a small gift tonight, which is useful, and I'm sure she can use it. Plus, it has a picture of a tiger on it, and also it will remind her of her battle against the oil refinery because it's an Exxon tiger. This is a little litter bag with a cute little Exxon tiger on it. Now, Helen's been involved in a lot of other things, too. You wouldn't believe, probably, that Helen once walked a picket line, would you? Looking at her here, you wouldn't think that she'd walked a picket line. Well, way back in, I can't remember whether it was 68 or 69, I think it was 68, the big dredge had started working in Sykes Creek to dredge up the area that is now Cook's Discount Place. Of course, a lot of us were just horribly incensed about this. We couldn't stop it, but there it was, chewing the guts out of Sykes Creek. And I was working out at the Cape at the time, and it was Saturday. It was my day off. I was trying to decide whether to go fishing or mow the lawn or what. And I got this excited call from Helen. She said, "Karl," she says, "Johnny Johnson is out there picketing the dredge on 520, and Alan and I are going over there immediately. I thought you'd like to know about it." Well, when Helen calls me and says she thinks I would like to know about it, that means you had better be over here within 15 minutes. Well, I quickly made myself a picket sign, and I stopped at the Publix market to get some cold drinks. I think it was sort of in the spring of the year. It's kind of a warm day anyhow, and some sandwiches, and I dashed over there. And the first thing I saw was Johnny Johnson there with a big sign plastered with "Save Our Waterways" stickers, huge sign, walking back and forth. Alan was sitting on a chair there because he had just gotten out of the hospital previously, and he wasn't about to be walking up and down and so forth. And I didn't see Helen at first, and then all of a sudden I spied her. She had this picket sign. She was going like this. Picketing that dredge. Now, believe me, she was serious about it. Well, like all historic occasions, I had not taken my camera. I have no pictures of this dramatic encounter. I didn't even save one of the picket signs. I've regretted it ever since. I'd love to have had a picture of Helen on the picket sign, but on the picket line, but unfortunately I didn't think about it. But I did bring tonight for Helen to have as a souvenir an exact replica. It's not the original, but an exact replica of her picket sign. There you are, Helen.
How are we going to get home?
Now we have a couple of joint gifts, and then I'll yield the floor here. I've had it long enough. Alan and Helen, of course, Alan's retired from lecturing, and now they're concentrating on leading nature field trips all over the world. And of course, this entails frequently going into some pretty wild, undeveloped areas. And of course, one of the hazards of going into the wilderness is, by George, you can get lost. Some people get lost out in the woods, and man, they're never heard of again. So we don't want this sort of thing to happen to Alan and Helen, certainly.
I even got lost in the parking lot.
You did? In that pile of rocks? They really ought to tear that thing down, Alan. That's not safe. Well, anyway, among people who frequent the wilderness a lot, backpackers and so forth, there's a system used. It's called the use of trail markers, wilderness trail markers. Now, of course, the Indians had this system. Those of you who know any Indian lore will remember that Indians used to put up little stone cairns here and there, and in different shapes, and one would say the trail goes to the right, one said the trail goes to the left, and one would say here's a good place to camp, or there's water over there. I think they did this. That's what they told me in Boy Scouts anyway. But using trail markers in the wilderness is an old established custom. But in recent years, they've developed some very new trail markers that are easy to see. They've been used by many people. The bugs have all been worked out of them. They work very well. And we just got a shipment of these in at the store a week or so ago. So I saved out a dozen or so for Alan and Helen, and we'll give them to them tonight. Now, first of all, I want to mention that there are two ways you can use these. Tell you truthfully, most people just put them along the trail every couple hundred yards, and as they go into the wilderness, and then when they come back out, they just follow these markers back to civilization. A lot of people just sort of leave them there. I don't know whether this is carelessness or whether they think that other travelers can use them to find their way back to civilization or what. The other approach, of course, is to pick them up when you come out and reuse them, because they are reusable. And I suspect Alan and Helen will use the latter technique because of Alan's Scotch ancestry. I'm sure you wouldn't want to leave them behind. So, Alan and Helen, we want you to have these wilderness trail markers.
Talk about Scotchmen, they're already empty.
I picked them up from a trail, Alan, you wouldn't believe it. Okay, one more gift. Now, really, I want to get serious for a minute. You know, Alan and Helen have been fighting the good, I'm afraid to touch this crazy thing, been fighting a good conservation battle here in Brevard County for many years, and I'm sure it's because of people such as the Cruickshanks that at least we had some greenery left in the county, and the dredges have been pretty well stocked, and at least some things hopefully are being saved for the future. But I got to thinking, what would it be like if there weren't people like the Cruickshanks? And so I drew up what I call a progress map of Brevard County, and this is sort of projected somewhere in the future. I don't know just what year, but it presupposes that perhaps progress would just continue on indefinitely, and I'm going to need some help here from somebody to unroll this and hold it up, and I'll show you some of the salient features of Brevard County after several years of progress. The right side up? Yes. Now, some of you probably can't see this, but I'll point out some things, and then if you'd like to, you can come over here and look at it. Let's start from the top. Now, right up here, the Trident base has gone in. They've cut into Mosquito Lagoon. They put a couple of big jetties out here. It's all barbed wire in. It says public keep out. The last part of Mosquito Lagoon is this little circle right here. That's Mosquito Lagoon. Up here in the corner, way up out of the way here, is Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. It's been reduced to 38 acres. Sorry about that, Dr. Baker. Well, there are other features. Now, this doesn't really look like Brevard County, but it's what Brevard County could be. This is the St. Johns River. Now, you notice it's nice and neat. It's neat, believe me. The Corps of Engineers has come in here, and they've straightened it out. They've taken all those little oxbows and ponds and things out, and it's nice and neat. Lake Poinsett is now Poinsett Reservoir, and they've diked it to make it look like a proper reservoir. It's nice and rectangular. Same thing with Lake Winder, Lake Washington. Oh, let's see, other features here. Now, you can't see the red because of these stupid red lights, but anyway, everything that's crosshatched here in red is urban. Up here is the metropolis of Mims, the metropolis of Titusville, the metropolis of Cocoa, Melbourne, Palm Bay, and Mico. Cocoa Beach has taken in all this area. Patrick Air Force Base is now the Patrick Regional Jetport, along with the jetport at Melbourne. We needed two jetports, of course. Satellite Beach, Indian Atlantic, and Melbourne Beach have all merged together, and this is called Ocean City Megalopolis here, all the way down the beach. There's a continuous wall of condominiums all the way down the beach. That's this right here. General Development has completed the Port Malabar business here. These are all residential canals that connect to the Indian River and the St. Johns River. These are all new causeways across here. I won't name them all, but these are all, you know, we need, with all these people, you need roads. You need 6-lane roads, so new causeways. Let's see. Some of you may remember when the dredges were working, Dick Young in one of his newspaper articles said, if these guys keep at it, the Banana River will be a foot wide and 1,000 feet deep. It is, in fact. Here it is, a foot wide and 1,000 feet deep. Banana River is now, whoa, I forgot to tell you, since the space program sort of ended, Disney bought this. This is now called Disney World Annex. There's a midway out here on ICBM Road. The Banana River up here is now called Regatta Lake. It's been cleaned up and made nice and neat. These things across here are green belts. See, the county planner said you can't have all these cities running together, so they let 100-foot green belts in here. Well, no, that's not funny. They went in there and they planted casuarinas and Brazilian peppers and dog fennel for ground cover. Oh, yes, the Indian River now has been made nice and neat. This is the Indian River. It was pretty messy before. It was wide and you couldn't run a boat. You know, there was a narrow channel. You couldn't put a boat anywhere except in the middle. So they decided to fill it all in, and it's now the Indian River Boat Canal. And it goes up here. Now, since the Navy took all this over, it closed down Haulover Canal, and the St. John's Indian River Canal has gone in here up to Sanford. Well, there's an industrial park, there's an oil refinery, there's a smog index reporting station here, a lot of things. Well, I won't go into all the gory details. This is your progress map of Brevard County. Well, now, that just about concludes my part of the festivities. We've had a little fun, but we're going to get a little more serious now. I want everybody to put on a very serious face now. This is an important part of the program, and I'm going to turn it over to our new president, Hugh Nicolay. Here's the map.
In order to put a slight break in the program, I think it's obvious that Mr. Eichhorn deserves a big round of applause for all the work he's put into this program this evening. Thanks, everybody. I would also like to recognize one young lady who has also contributed to the banquet tonight. Mariana Charrington, as I'm sure all of you know, has taken care of the arrangements for the banquet with the restaurant here and the tickets and the seating, and worried about it a whole lot for the last few months, and also contributed to the forming of the program. And I'd like to have her stand and be recognized. At this point in the program, we would like to make some presentations to Alan and Helen. I've been selected to make a presentation to Helen. This comes about, I guess, because of my position as incoming president. I'll just shut off the tape recorder. I've only known the Cruickshanks, of course, for just a couple years, and it seems like it would be more appropriate if there was some long-standing friend and so on making a presentation. I feel that this is the first time in my presidency, having lasted 2 hours already, I feel very inadequate for the position. But I will commence with this presentation. I'd like Helen to stand, if she will, please. Your friends and fellow members of this society have made a purchase of a book. The book is titled The Native Orchids of Florida. The photographer and editor and author of the book is Karl Eichhorn. And I would like to read the inscription on the front cover to you from the society. Presented to Helen Cruickshank as a token of our love, affection, and sincere gratitude for your dedication to the conservation of Florida's natural resources, for your wisdom and guidance over the years, for your time and talent so freely given, so freely and unselfishly given, and for your making us appreciative of and sensitive to the natural beauty of this earth and all its creatures. The flowers are glad there is a Helen Cruickshank. We are glad you are our friend. Presented by the members of Indian River Audubon Society on the 19th day of May, 1973. Thank you very much.
I simply cannot thank you people enough. I always find it very difficult to say the right words at the right time, but I hope you all realize how deeply, genuinely, I appreciate the most beautiful who are here with us tonight. I can remember when we first came here that the Audubon Society was a little group of about 15 people that met in the living rooms of various members. It has grown through the years, and the great growth started with Bill Houston. When Bill could no longer officiate as president, Ken West took over and did a beautiful job. Then we were so fortunate to have Karl Eichhorn. He was a marvelous president. And then we had the tragedy of Joe, whom we loved so deeply, and who would have carried this society on to still greater heights. But then Hal stepped in. He has done a terrific job. So many young people are members now, and the activity goes forward, and I know with Hugh, we're going to go still farther in preserving the genuine beauties and the genuine values of Brevard County. So thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you for this beautiful book.
I will make a presentation that is not in existence. We have reason to believe there exists a decoy, wood, hand-painted, in the mail, which we have ordered for Alan and Helen. It is of the Merganser, and we will transmit it to you when it arrives. We hope to have it here tonight for a formal presentation, but it'll be coming shortly, and it's a gift from all the members of the Society to both of you. Not done. I have a real quick one. I want to give this to Alan to go with the hand-carved, hand-painted decoy.
Oh.
You don't mind?
Oh, go ahead.
Those are expert shotgun shells, courtesy of our new board member, Dave Dunsmore.
I would like to turn the mic over now to our ex-president, member of the board, chairman of youth education, Mr. Hal Wyle.
Since I've been with the Audubon Society, the Indian River chapter particularly, one of my finest pleasures has been the knowing and working with two of the finest people I've had the opportunity to come across. I think one of the things I've found in the Audubon Society, that sincerity is always there. And if I can add to the many honors and awards that this lovely Helen and this noble Alan have gathered over the years, we would do justice for this night. Between the two of them, among these many awards, they have captured the Burroughs Medal for great achievements in nature writing, and recently Allan Cruickshank received the Arthur A. Allen Award for outstanding contributions to the field of ornithology, one of the finest awards anyone can ever receive. And it is with this note that we as an organization cannot give a medal, but we can give something from our hearts.
And with this in mind, I'd like Alan to step forward.
Alan, for the many years that you've worked for the cause, I think, of mankind, I think this book is apropos for you. It's written by Peter Matheson, The Tree Where Man Was Born, and the photographs are by Elliot Porter, The African Experience. And as you all know, Alan has had a lot to do with Africa recently. I'd like to read the very short inscription we have in here. With love and appreciation for so many years of sharing your knowledge of birds and birding with us, affectionately yours, IRAS, May 19, 1973. Thank you, Alan, for being one of us.